Hi, I'm Jamie and welcome to the CDNify podcast. Today I'm joined by Joel Marsh, who's the guy behind the very popular blog, The Hipper Element. He's also an author, having written The Composite Persuasion, and he has co-founded the startup called Teller. So today we're gonna chat about the importance of UX design, writing persuasive content, and finally discuss some of Joel's upcoming projects. So welcome, Joel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So the first question: do you mind telling everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I am Canadian. I live in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm originally educated as a designer, or I guess I went to 2 years of university for computer science and kind of hated every minute of it. So I switched and then went to a digital design school. And after a few years of freelancing, I kind of had, I'm from a city called Halifax, which is a few 100,000 people, but we're out of the way. So the clients that are available there are sort of local stuff like provincial government and universities and that kind of stuff. So after a few years, I was working with those clients, and there wasn't any level higher than that. So I figured I either had to hire people and start doing bigger things, or move somewhere and start doing better things. And in that year, Swedish designers won far more awards than any other country, including America, and that's 9 million people versus 300 million people. So I moved to, I sold all my stuff and bought a plane ticket and showed up in Stockholm. Started doing job interviews, and I've been there ever since. Worked at a couple agencies and a couple startups and even a bank. So now I'm a founder of a startup.
Oh, that's awesome. Right, so moving on to our next question. I mean, like I mentioned, you've written a book called The Composite Persuasion, and it talks about psychological methods to understand and then convince your audience to take some form of action. Now, in your experience, what are the things people should take into consideration when attempting to persuade users to move from point A to point B?
Well, actually, before I wrote the book, that was exactly the question I posed to myself, and it was partly from doing a bunch of marketing for people, but it was more, as UX became more and more something that I worked on, I began to realize that the more objective things like pure usability and that kind of stuff is not that hard to get your head around, and it tends to be the same sorts of solutions all the time. But when it comes to subjective stuff like what motivates users or what makes people feel good and that kind of stuff, it felt very unpredictable and very, it was just a lot harder to get my head around it. So I started researching into that, and the more I looked into it, I started comparing methods of different types of persuaders, and the more I looked into it, the more everybody seemed to have things in common. And those things were things that I was doing as well, but I didn't realize that I was doing because I didn't have any frame of reference. So in the book, I outline these 8 common things that all these persuaders and manipulators actually as well tend to have in common. And they're things that they're the type of things that when I say them now, it might sound obvious, but if I were to pick apart something that somebody was doing, most people fail at most of them most of the time, and I was the same before. So a lot of people don't spend enough time thinking about their reputation, and reputation, when we use that word, we tend to think of things like a long tradition of quality or like, a politician's reputation or something like that. But the reputation that is important for most of us most of the time is kind of what happened in the last 10 minutes, or like how am I behaving right now? So if your behavior is valuable right now, and if you're giving the other person the impression that you have something to offer, as opposed to being insecure or defensive or whatever. So reputation was one. A lot of people rely on their intuition rather than trying to learn how people actually work. So that's the second one, is in the book is predicting your audience. So knowing what actually motivates people rather than relying on your own experience and trying to, or assuming that they'll react to the same things that you like. The third one is knowing how to start a conversation, which is probably what makes any guy who has ever approached a girl at a bar knows exactly how hard that can be, just to kind of start up and create a conversation from scratch. But just being able to create interest from the other person, and then disarm any concerns they might have. If it is, approaching somebody in public or whatever, a lot of the time a stranger comes up and starts talking to you, the first thought on your mind is, okay, how long is this going to take? So that like good persuaders in that kind of a context, the first thing they will say will be, do you mind if I talk to you for a minute or two? I just have a question. And then that concern is disarmed. But that kind of disarming in any persuasive context is something that is often overlooked. And even if it's on a landing page where you're trying to sell something or anything like that, it's often good to, like the price is a perfect example, or the shipping cost. If you're selling something in e-commerce, that it's been shown in a number of studies that throwing in the shipping cost as the last step in the checkout gets worse conversion than showing the shipping cost right up front. Because then people know it's coming and it's the same price, but there's no element of surprise. So disarming that concern. Probably the biggest one that all persuaders had in common, the fourth one, was creating rapport. So this feeling of getting along, or like when you have a first date and you click with that, or a job interview for that matter. Just that sense of, we're getting along, we're two of the same kind of people. That's a huge one, and it was probably the one that was in common in most of the, out of the 40 methods that I compared, it was 35 of them had some element of rapport building. So like fortune tellers, for example, were people that I considered, or hostage negotiators. And the hostage negotiators, for example, have a very formal, that's a huge thing. It's if they don't have rapport with the person who has taken the hostages, they don't really go forward. But it's exactly the same if you're selling, or if you're trying to seduce someone, whether that's marketing-wise or romantically or whatever. That feeling of rapport kind of opens the door for everything else. Once somebody feels like you're on their side, or you're on the same team, or they already agree with what you're getting at, then they tend to interpret everything, all the other facts and information you give them in a preferable way. So
just to quickly recap, you said to understand them, that'll be one of the first steps, then to engage with them, and then to get some sort of rapport.
Yes, and the first step there was just to take a brief second to consider your reputation. Sometimes you can disagree with somebody and actually get more points in the persuasion because you're upholding your integrity. And just as an example, so people might actually respect you more for disagreeing if that disagreement maintains your authority. Okay, so then after all that, you've kind of none of that is actually trying to convince somebody, and that when you say persuasion to people, a lot of people immediately jump into that mind frame of, okay, I need to give you all the facts and the argument of why you should agree. But everything I've named so far is just sort of setting the emotional stage for convincing. So the next thing you want to do is isolate. So that's just to remove any competing persuasions. Once upon a time, I actually did door-to-door sales. And the thing that would kill the most of those sales was when the spouse kind of came around the corner halfway through the pitch and didn't hear the whole emotional setup, and then just started tearing it down, and it would almost always fail. So, but on a website, it's the same. Once you get into the checkout, on a lot of websites, even the main menu disappears because it's just one more option for you to click. There's no banners. There's no way out. A lot of the time, you're in the funnel, so you're going to stay in the funnel. Then comes the convincing stage. So after all of that, that's when you can present facts and your actual convincing argument. But even then, a lot of it is based on how understandable that argument is. So it's a simple, engaging argument. And if it's a longer or a more complex kind of pitch in any way, then you need to start simple and get people on board, and then increase the complexity and add details as you go, rather than just hitting them with all the information at once. Then you close. You know, the saying, whether it's salespeople or startups, always be closing, is that's the close step. And then the final thing, after the persuasion feels over, you need to make sure that people remember the interaction in a positive way. So it's good to review what just happened to them without mentioning any of the negative things. So when you buy, Apple does this really well. So when you buy a computer online through Apple, the next thing you'll get, maybe a day later, is an email saying, here's all the great things your new MacBook can do. So it's sort of reinforcing that purchase, and it eliminates that buyer's remorse thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the things that are the big parts of the book, and those are, if in that sequence is how they typically work. There are some examples of people doing creative things, but generally speaking, if you can nail all 8 of those, it's hard for people to say no.
I mean, let's move on to persuasive content that's written. I mean, persuasive content is generally regarded as well written and relevant copy that convinces people into taking or performing some sort of action. I mean, like you were just saying then with the hostage negotiations, that's verbal, but it's a different situation when it's written. I mean, what advice would you give to people that are trying to write persuasive content? I mean, whether that's in emails, a landing page, or a blog.
Well, I mean, okay, so obviously the ingredients are the same, but yeah, you're right. There's you don't get any of the body language, or it's hard to smile at somebody when they're reading. The persuasive written content, I think that anytime I've worked with clients on writing things that are persuasive, or I wrote an article on my blog about how to write a persuasive email, and in most of the scenarios, it's about really sort of taking yourself out of the equation and really writing for the person who's going to read. And I think that, like, for example, the definition of something being well written can mean different things to different people. So if, like, a well-written scientific paper, some people might consider that a very wordy, elaborate kind of thing. But the more big words and technical jargon and things you include in things, the less persuasive it gets, because the less people understand it. Generally speaking, a simply written piece of text is much more persuasive than something that is very poetic or, nicely written.
Yeah, I mean, you're essentially guiding the user, like holding the hand, so to speak.
Yeah. Exactly. The email thing that I wrote used an example from an investor, a VC, and he had posted an email that had persuaded him from somebody who was approaching him for the first time. And basically, that on the surface, that email looks like it's all about the guy's company that he's writing about, but when you actually deconstruct it, which I did there, that he's really creating a whole scenario of flattery for the reader. So he's making the VC feel amazing about himself and putting him in a position of authority where he gets to, where helping is a thing. And even the VC at the end of it said, that he felt really good after reading that email, and it was the most persuasive email he had ever received, in his opinion. So it's actually really funny how little the content, like the facts and information, matters, and how much the emotional content matters.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite interesting. I mean, moving on from persuasive content, you've got a blog called The Hipper Element, which does talk about persuasive content, but it also focuses on user experience, behavioral science. I mean, this all ties in to persuading the user. But your blog has quite a large following. I mean, what techniques have you used to grow your audience, and what tips could you give to others?
Well, my blog right now is in its current incarnation is less than a year old. So and it's I don't tend to refer to myself as a blogger. So I write often, a lot about UX, but the behavior definitely comes into it. And I've been, even since the beginning, sort of feeling out what people want to read.
Yeah.
So I defined my own boundaries about what I feel qualified to write about, and then within those boundaries, I'm sort of poking the audience to see what people respond to. And I think that, as simple as that sounds, actually, that has done a lot for me. And it's very clear which articles get response from people with likes, or which ones are shared. And recently, or one of the questions that I had seen in the UX forums all the time was people asking, I want to get started in UX, or I just got my first UX job, or whatever. Where can I learn how to do it? So this January, I've decided to do a UX crash course. And just every day I posted a quick lesson about it, and that has been massively successful. So it really is like just going out and actively seeking, or at least paying attention to all the questions that people ask within my domain, and then whenever I can answer them, I try to answer them. And then on top of that, I think I pay a lot of attention to places in social media where relevant people hang out, which is another kind of obvious one if you think about it. But I think that there's no such thing as too much attention to which groups are talking about which things. So whenever I post articles from my blog somewhere, it's always, this article is about this, and that group of people are the ones that are talking about that. So it goes there. So
you go to the places to talk to them. I mean, could you give some examples of where you would go to engage with UX developers, for example?
Yeah, sure. I tend to customize any social thing that I'm involved in so that I see all those things. Reddit is a really good example. I mean, Reddit is a huge website with, I don't know how many it is now, but it's over 100,000 subtopics.
Yeah, I imagine there's quite a few subtopics with regarding design and user experience and web development, and I imagine there's loads of people in there ready to engage.
There are actually there's a web design and web development are two separate topics, and there is user experience, which is actually a really small subreddit, but specific UX things. I also subscribe to one called social engineering there, which is a lot more persuasion driven. If I post something that's about UX in the social engineering, it dies a horrible quiet death. And if I post that exact same article in the web design or the UX or the usability community, then it will often get a lot more attention. Whereas the persuasion articles, I had an article that once about social obligations, so the things you feel like you need to do just because most people do them. And that was really popular in the social engineering subreddit, but if I had posted that over in web design, nobody would have thought it was relevant.
Yeah, it would have just fallen flat on its face.
Right, exactly. And UX persuasion also doesn't do very well on something like Hacker News, because that's startups and tech and whatever. Whereas the UX articles do tend to get attention because there are a lot of people, in the startup world that need UX, but it's a little hard to find. So they're a lot, like the UX crash course started on Hacker News and spent 24 hours in the top 10, and that launched that, and then the viral internet took over. But I think it's those kind of things, like not being like an outside observer of your people.
I think UX is quite good to define a user experience, but there are certain aspects of it that are deemed inappropriate. I mean, UX would drive people to a certain place, but there are darker sides to it that are seen as, I would say, either bad practice or unethical. And some examples are dark patterns and dark UX. I mean, can you share your thoughts on such methods?
Yeah, those things definitely exist. I have had many opportunities to do or not do those things myself, and I think that it really is the other side of the coin, because basically what we're learning to do in UX is design behavior.
Yeah.
And if you can make people do something that is good, then you can make some people do something that's bad.
I mean, would you define it as would you define it as the equivalent of email spam?
In a way, I guess. I think that it's more of a moral thing, though, because it often is exactly the same skill, and it just depends on which way you're going to turn it. And there are actually like anti-UX things that are helpful that you can do in business, which sounds counterintuitive, but like Facebook, for example, if you want to get rid of your account on Facebook, they make it kind of a hassle to get out, and that's using usability backwards. So that they're making it less usable to make sure that people who are about to make an impulsive decision they might regret tomorrow, that hassle gets them thinking rationally, and it's too much work, so you might just give up instead. And that turns out to be a good thing for the user, even if in the moment it feels like the opposite of what they want. Whereas, so like Ryanair's website, I don't mind using them as an example of dark UX. Ryanair has a website that intentionally tries to deceive you into accidentally choosing things that cost more money. And I am very, very tempted to write an article where I outline every way that they do that. But it's very difficult, actually, to buy the minimum thing on their website just because of the way they've designed it. So in that sense, I really hate that sort of approach, because they could make a really good website and get people to use them more often and make money that way, but instead they're trying to squeeze every customer for an extra few pounds or euros or whatever.
I mean, staying on topic for flights, I think an equivalent to Ryanair, I can't remember what it's called. It uses cookies to track users. So if you're looking to buy a flight, what it does is if you go away and then you return, it has that information stored, so it bumps up the price. And that's pretty deceitful, I would say. So that's exactly, and I think that algorithmic stuff is becoming more and more common as a good thing in UX, where you can recommendation engines and whatever to help people get to the good content, but there's always a negative way to use it, and it's the internet, so there's always a person who's looking for a way to abuse. And it really is exactly the same skill used for the alternative purpose. And when I'm teaching UX or talking about UX or whatever, one of my main or key points for every UX designer is that one of the first steps is to take the user goals and the business goals and connect them so that they are achieved by the same thing. And that's my definition of good UX. If the business profits when the user completes their goal. But if you disconnect those two things and make them so that the business profits without the user getting there, you can make the user run around and see a whole bunch of pages just so that you can show more ads. And in a way, that's sort of the dark UX light of putting 3 or 4 more clicks into a process just so you can get a few more banner ads to show. Yeah.
So there's that. Earlier in my career, I worked on an ad server, and that company was totally on the up and up. But being in that sort of field, I got a chance to see some of the things that advertisers are doing or trying to do on the internet and behavioral targeting, and there's a lot of negative potential in those technologies.
Well, I mean, in 2013, we saw a few design trends, such as downsampling, which reduces the massive amounts of data down to attractive visuals like infographics. And we saw a few other things in 2013 as well. I mean, a few dark things like we just mentioned, and a few good things as well, like I just said, downsampling. So 2014, what do you think it holds in terms of UX design trends?
Good question. I think it's worth maybe mentioning here that UX, and I'm flirting with being a purist right now, but UX itself doesn't really have trends, because UX is sort of like design psychology, if you want to look at it like that. So that it's not really a matter of the trend, it's more a matter of accumulating knowledge like science. So that we're just getting better and better at it, and then you can apply it in lots of different ways. So the application, like the UI design, is the trend, and that obviously is a lot of different things. Like infographics were around in print, 60 years ago or whatever. So that's sort of just coming back around. But for 2014, really genuine UX trends, I don't think are going to be an interface. It's not going to be something that you see. I think there will be lots of trends that you can see, but if you really want to look at UX, I think that it's going to be making tech more like data, for example, using data and algorithms to allow people to cut through the noise a lot faster, or to customize what they want, or to create a lot more engagement.
Your new service, Teller, is the world's first email browser and is expected to launch in spring 2014. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is and how it can help organize emails?
Yes. Teller is an email app, so it'll be downloadable to desktop and mobile, and it is the first step in a much bigger vision. We have big ideas about what email can do, and I think that email has been so crap for so long that everybody's expectations are really low. But we have, so we have a big vision, and the first thing that we need to do is redesign the way email works for the individual people to be able to handle that, much bigger ambition. So we're still kind of stealthy, stealth mode-ish.
So you still are you in beta phase now, or?
Yeah, ish. We're still building, but we're starting to test things now. So I can't talk too much about the specific features, but we can definitely talk about the problems that we're working on. One of the things with email is that there's email as we know it today isn't built to handle billions of people communicating via email. So the first thing we're doing is we've designed an inbox that dramatically reduces how much effort it takes to handle large volumes of email. So the more email you get with ours, the more efficient you become. So it does a lot of sorting automatically and makes sure that you see the important things first and stuff like that. Content in email is also very weak. Anything has to be attached, and email is a text medium, and then you attach everything else. At least for the normal person. So we're upgrading that quite a bit, and then actually attachments are being eliminated in ours. We're doing something better with them. You can still send files and everything, but they're not attached. And then the whole way we treat archives is very different. So the word browser in email browser is going to come from being able to see your archive rather than just using search to go through it. So it's a high volume, high content email app.
No, I mean I can't wait for it. I've already signed up because with my emails I'm very disorganized at times, and emails are just everywhere, and it's something like this could really help me organize and get sorted of the thousands of emails that I get daily.
How many unread messages do you have in your inbox right now?
Because I have many different accounts. I would say just under 100 or so. So I mean that's a daily task right there, just to sort through that.
Yeah, so. 100 is not too bad. We had believe it or not. We did last year. We built a little microsite, and the purpose of it was mostly data collection and a little bit of PR, I guess. But we put it on Hacker News, and we asked people to let us count the emails in their inbox, just for the sake of research. And we then checked those numbers with the algorithm that we're going to use for our inbox. And on average, we were able to make people twice as efficient, so it would take half the time to handle your emails. But a lot of people were in the 80-90% range, so that would mean that it would take 10% of the time that it normally takes to handle your email to get a lot. But we saw some insane inboxes. I was actually really surprised at how big some people's inboxes are.
I mean, how big are we talking here?
The biggest one that we saw was 300,000 emails.
Whoa, that's yeah, that's a lot.
That's an order of magnitude bigger than I would have guessed.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, and that's a guy. That guy partly was working with, like, he had computers sending him emails. On purpose. So he had a lot of kind of auto sorting happening, and he had a very complicated setup. And the interesting thing about that is that he wouldn't have needed any setup at all to handle that with Teller. It's just sort of neatly sits into the way we've done it. But people with hundreds of thousands of emails in their archive is crazy. But then there were people with tens of thousands of unread emails, which is just that's an insurmountable task.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to get through that.
No, so then, I mean, that's really when you start to see the genuine problem with email. I think that might be sort of the top 1%. But if you consider the fact that less than half of the people in the world are on the internet right now still, imagine everything about email doubling. And it starts getting a bit crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. But I mean, that's why we need something to organize our email, especially the guy who has 10,000 emails being sent to him daily.
Yeah.
So moving on, if there's any listeners who are interested in writing persuasive content, UX design or experience architecture, are there any sites or blogs out there that you would recommend? Well, I mean, obviously the Hipper element. that's one.
I can selflessly plug myself there, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I plugged it for you, so it's fine.
I love taking questions and requests and stuff, actually. So one of the problems with UX is that it is a little bit hard to find where to start and what to read and all that kind of stuff. So if people find me on Twitter and ask me, there's actually a reasonable chance I will write an article and answer their question or just tweet. But aside from that, there's a few good ones. Jared Spool is kind of he's pretty well known in the UX circles, but his website and Twitter feed, I can't think of the website off the top of my head. His Twitter handle, I think, is UIE. And that's a website. They post lots of good stuff. Unbounce is that's a very good blog. That was started by Ollie Gardner, and I respect him quite a lot, actually, because I share his view that the best way to know a lot is to see a lot and do a lot, as opposed to just being a quote-unquote guru because it makes you feel awesome. And he has dedicated himself to landing pages. And it says even on his Twitter self-description that he has seen more landing pages than anybody in the world. And he is genuinely really good at it, and Unbounce publishes a lot of really solid content about conversion. So that's really good. Persuasion is a weird topic to try to find online. I think there's a lot of well-known classic books, but a lot of the most classic books are actually 30 years old.
I mean, you could recommend a book. A good book that I came across was The Composite Persuasion. That's another plug.
Quite a brilliant book.
Yeah.
UX-wise, there's a few good books. Luke W. is actually a good blog to follow too. Luke W. has published a couple of books that are really good. He has one called Web Form Design, which is, as far as I've seen, is probably the best UX book about forms.
Okay.
He used to work for eBay and Yahoo, I think. So he's done a lot of large-scale testing, and he wrote about that. And there's a couple classic books like Emotional Design and Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. Those are good starting points. There isn't really a lot of good stuff if you're already past the starting points. A List Apart is a really good website for UX, and they break it down into a couple of different, like, more emotional stuff and then more usability stuff and some performance stuff. So those are good places to start. I tend to try to get into social media sites and then find this like on Reddit. If you subscribe to all the web design and usability and persuasion subgroups, then you suddenly find yourself surrounded by material.
Yeah, and there's a community you can engage with there as well. I mean, there's also, I mean, you could do the same on Twitter as well, can't you? I mean, you could follow some experts in UX on there.
If you're into behavioral science, I only follow people with my blog account that post good stuff often, and I only follow I think 37 people right now. And all of those feeds are good. There's some of them that are very sciencey, like proper science.
And what's your handle so people can find out?
At Hipper Element.
At Hipper Element. Okay. And to finally wrap things up, can you tell us about some of your upcoming projects and what the future holds for Teller?
Yes, project-wise, I'm super focused on Teller right now. We have funding and everything, so we're full-time on that. And we plan to launch that within the next few months, and that will hopefully do well when we launch and only get bigger and bigger from there. Blog-wise, I'm continuing all the time. I usually use my blog as almost like a public collection of all the links, good links and stuff that I find. So it's functional for that. I think project-wise, for me personally, I'm trying to tap some of the conferences around the world for some speaking spots. I'm not really interested in 50 dates a year or anything, but if I could speak at some good UX conferences a few times a year, I think that would be really good. There are surprisingly few senior UX people. I could even say in the world, much fewer than are needed. So. It's nice if I can get out there maybe and teach a bit and meet some people and all that. So yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of startup related kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it seems like you've got a very busy 2014 then.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all we have time for now, but I mean, we've had quite an interesting talk about UX design, persuasive content, and we've also plugged some of your stuff as well, and we've touched on darker topics as well. So yeah, I mean, thanks for your time, Joel. Thanks for coming on to the CDNify podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, thank you.